guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. Normally when I make dragons I tend to go very long and lengthy and elegant, but this time around I wanted to go for something just kind of cute and chubby, so I'm going to be making a baby star dragon. Anyways, let's get started. So with the clay head, I'm going to go for something a little bit more chunky and rounded, nothing too angular or anything like that. Honestly, the basic shape that I'm making for the clay head to start with looks a lot like a baby hippo head. So I'm just going to get that basic shape laid out and then I can start adding details to the face. Now the first detail that I'm going to start adding to the face are going to be the eyes. These I decided to make out of resin, so they're just basically resin with a little bit of mica powder in them to give them a blue tint, and then I have some really chunky glitter in them. So I'm going to figure out where I want the eyes to go. I'm going to make sure they're nice and even, you don't have one eye just slightly higher than the other, and then I'm going to take some strips of clay and start making the eyelids under and over the eyes. Normally I like to start with the bottom eyelid first and then move to the top eyelid. I'm not really sure why, I just tend to find out that this works really well for me. So I'm going to get the eyes placed, adjust how they look. I'm going to probably add a little bit more of a brow above the eye, and then I'm going to clean up the edge around the clay head, that way it looks a little bit more neat. After that I'm going to start building up clay on the top of the head so we have a spot to add the horns. Now these horns are both made out of resin and clay. They were actually a mistake. I was just casting some normal horns and the resin on the tips didn't cure properly, so I decided to pull off the uncured resin and add clay tips to decorate them. And then I really liked how they looked, so I decided to actually base this whole dragon around these horns. Sadly, these horns were a bit of a just extra project, so I don't really have any footage of making them. And then the last little extra detail that I'm going to add to the face is a little starred gem. I found this at Hobby Lobby when I was looking for gems for commissions, and I ended up really liking it. It was only like $2. So I'm just going to set this right in the middle of the forehead and start adding clay around it to decorate it. While doing this, I decided that I wanted to frame the horns a little bit more that we're going to add. So I'm going to start adding some scales that are going to be a little bit more raised and decorative, almost making it look like it has a crown. And then after I was done decorating the very top of the head, I'm going to move on to adding the mouth and the nostrils. For the mouth, I'm going to take a strip of clay, I'm going to kind of flatten it and make an upper lip for the mouth. I'm going to lay that out and blend it upwards into the face. And then I'm going to do a very similar thing to the bottom lip, it's just going to be a little bit smaller and less defined. So I'm going for kind of a slightly open mouth for our baby dragon. So I'm going to lay that out and then I'm going to add a little bit more clay to the top of the snout, that way our nose sticks up a little bit more. And then I'm going to mark out where I want the nostrils to go with my tools. So I'm just going to kind of push in and mark those out, make sure they're nice and even, and then I'm going to start adding some scale details around our face. So I'm just going to add some line work to the top of the snout, around the lips, and just kind of make some really chunky scales around there. And then lastly, I'm going to clean up the edge a little bit more around the base of the head, that way it's nice and smooth, and then add a little bit of a texture to the rest of the face that we didn't add scales to. For this, I'm just using the backing of a seashell because I really like the texture of it. And then once we're done with our clay head, we can put this in the oven for probably about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Moving on to our clay feet, these are also going to be very chunky and baby-like, and I also want the toes to be a bit rounded, so our claws are not going to be sharp or anything like that. So I'm going to start with a very basic wire frame for our feet. So I'm going to have each foot have 4 toes, so we have 4 wires spread out for those toes. So the first bit of clay that I'm going to add to our wire frame is just a little bit of clay around where all the wires are combined, just to stabilize everything a little bit more, and then I'm going to add the claws to the tips of all the wires. Once I have those in place, I'm going to do a pre-bake for just 20 minutes at our 275 Fahrenheit temperature. And then once that has cooled to touch, we can start working on adding clay to the bottoms of the feet. So for the bottoms of the feet, I'm going to start by adding balls of clay and little strips of clay and just kind of covering up all the wires. So I'm going to start with the very palm of the foot and then work my way up the wires until we get to the claws. One thing that I like to do to make my toes look a little bit chunkier is to have the base of them a little bit thinner and then the ends of them to be a bit more rounded. So I'll add a lot more clay to the ends of them and then smooth everything together. So once I have everything covered up and blended together, I'm then going to take my tools and add some wrinkles here and there around the joints to make it look like the fingers can actually bend. It's just to add a little bit extra detail, that way they don't look so flat and stiff. And then after that, if you want, you can do another pre-bake to save your work in progress, just another 20 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. After that, we can start adding the scales to the tops of the toes. So I'm going to do mine just a little bit differently than I normally do. I just want them to match the scales that I have framing the horns. So I'm going to add just a little bit of an indent and add some line work to it, just to make them a little bit more detailed. So I'm just going to take those balls of clay and layer them and add that little bit of texture in between layering them. And then for the fronts of the feet, once we get the toes covered, I'm going to take some larger strips of clay and lay those out to make some larger scales on the top of the foot. And then for the back feet, we're going to add some clay to the back wire and just kind of extend the foot a little bit, and then we're going to add some scales to the front of this as well. So the main difference between the front and back is the back ones are just kind of stretched out a little bit more and we have more scales to work with. So once our clay feet are done, we're going to put these in the oven for one final bake. They're going to go in for about 45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once everything is done baking and is cool to touch, we can start painting everything. So I'm going to start by painting the face first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by framing around our resined eyes. I don't want to get a whole lot of paint on them just because it's a bit of a pain to peel the paint off of resin. It's a lot easier if you're working with glass eyes, you can just scrape it right off, but it's a little bit more difficult with resin. So I'm going to frame around our resined eyes with a little bit of black, and then once that's dried, I'm going to primer the rest of the face with a purple. So I'm going to go over the entire face and make sure everything is a nice dark purple. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to lighten up my purple and start adding some highlights to the front of the face. After that, I can start going in and adding more details to our scales. So the scales around the lips and going up the snout, I'm going to be painting those a metallic blue. And then the scales on the top of the head that are going to be framing our horns, once we add those I'm going to be painting gold, along with adding gold accents around the different scale details that I want to have on the face. So honestly, painting the face was quite easy. It was just blocking in the colors that I wanted and adding a bit of a highlight here and there. Really wasn't too much work. And then moving on to painting the clay feet, I'm going to start with the front feet, and I'm going to be primering these a purple to match the face, but the back feet we're going to be primering a dark blue. The reason for this is the body is going to have blues and purples throughout, and I wanted to have a little bit of a change between the front and back feet. So I'm going to get both of these primered, and then I'm going to move on to adding a little bit of detail to the bottoms of the feet. Now normally you don't have to add a ton of detail to the bottoms of the feet, you really don't see that too much, but I wanted to add a bit of a pink tint to them to make it look like there was padding. So I'm just going to go over the bottoms of the feet with a pink, and then I'm going to let that dry. Once that's dried, I'm going to go over and paint the claws. Now I want them to kind of match the face a little bit, so I'm going to use that same blue metallic paint and go over the claws with it. And then lastly, we're going to be painting the scales on the tops of the feet, that gold color that we painted the other scales. So I'm going to go over all those scales with my gold paint. I'm going to let everything dry, and then I'm going to have to glue on those horns to the face and resin all of our clay pieces. That way the paint is protected. So that's going to have to cure overnight, so while we're waiting on our clay pieces, we can start sewing our body pieces, and then we can put everything together when the clay pieces are done. Okay, so this is the pattern that I drew out to make our baby dragon. Like I said before, I wanted it to be really cute and chunky, so everything is kind of more rounded and just a bit thicker than normal when I make my dragons. So I'm going to start with the body pieces. So the neck and tail are going to be a purple sequence, and the body is going to be a blue one. So I'm going to sew all of these together for the left and right of the body. And then once these are sewn together, I'm then going to sew our two pieces together down the belly. So I'm going to make one solid piece for our body. And then after that, we're going to sew the fabric for the legs. So I have the front legs. These are going to be a purple sequence, and they have an inside portion and an outside portion. So I'm going to sandwich these together and sew down just the front of them. And then we're going to do the same thing with the back legs, except the outside portion of these are going to be blue and the inside are going to be purple. So I'm going to take these, sandwich them, and sew down the fronts of them. And then after that, we're going to start sewing the wings. The wings are going to have a top and a bottom. We're going to pin these together and sew all the way around, leaving the base of it open so we can flip them right side out. After that, I added a few extra lines of sewing. That way we could stuff the body of the wing without stuffing the membranes of the wing. And then to decorate our wings, I have a bunch of gold scales that I cut out of my fake leather fabric, and I'm going to glue these all over them. So I'm just going to use some fabric glue, and I'm going to glue these on both sides of the wings. Okay, at this point I have all of my clay pieces cured and they're ready so we can put our dragon together. So I'm going to start with a wire frame. I have a very simple one. The only thing different than most of my wire frames is I used a little bit of a thicker gauge. So normally I tend to use a 16, but for this, because the clay pieces are heavy, I used a 14. So I'm going to start with taking the fabric for the body. I've cut some holes where the wires of the legs are going to stick through, and I'm going to slide this over the wire frame. Then I'm going to take our clay head that has our horns already in place, and I'm going to glue this to the wire for the neck. Once that's in place, we can then take the fabric for the neck and start gluing it around the base of the head. I also have a little bit of black fur fabric that I want to add going around the head. So this is going to go more on the top portion and around to the side of the face. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of that black fabric, and this is going to go down the back of the dragon. So we're going to start closing up our body. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to sew it to the back portion of the neck, and we're going to start sewing down the sides of the dragon. We're going to stop where the wires for the wings are going to go, and then we're going to start sewing after we have those sticking out. So we're going to sew around those wires. And of course, while we're sewing, we're going to be stuffing until we get to the very end of the tail and closing everything up. After that, I'm going to take the wings that we made and I'm going to slide those onto the wires for the wings, and we're going to sew these in place. So I'm going to go all the way around and just hand sew these in place on the body. Then we're going to start adding the front legs. So I'm going to take the fabric for those, we're going to sew the inside portion under the wire for the leg and the outside portion of the leg over the wire for the leg. That way the wire is inside of this when we're done. Once we have that sewn into place, we can cut our wire to fit and add our clay feet to the wire frame. So I'm going to wrap these in place, and then we can glue the fabric for the leg around the base of the foot. You'll want to let that dry for a little bit, and then we can stuff and close up our back legs. And then once you have the front legs done, you can do the same thing to the back legs. We're going to sew that fabric into place, add the clay legs, glue the fabric around the base of those, let that dry, stuff, and close up. So at this point, our dragon's body is all put together, and now we can add our last bit of details. So I'm going to go over the body and add some highlights and just kind of add a little bit of extra touch to the sequence with some paint. That way everything kind of blends together a little bit more. So I'm going to do that, let that dry, and then the last thing that I want to do is I want to add some more gold scales to the body. So I'm going to mainly do this around the feet, and then I'll add a few things going up the legs. At first, I honestly wanted to add these scales all over the body, but after adding it to the front legs and back, I realized it looked better leaving it just that way. Okay guys, and here is our baby star dragon. I'm really happy with it. I was trying to go for something a little bit more life-size, so it's quite large. Normally I don't have them this big, but I wanted something that would feel like a life-size baby dragon. Anyways guys, I'm gonna have our new baby dragon up for sale in my Etsy shop, so if anyone wants to buy him and give him a new home, check the links down below for that. I also have links down below for all the art supplies that I tend to really like using to make my art dolls. These are affiliated links, so they do help support the channel if you buy anything through them. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!